Let's talk about YouTube, the YouTube algorithm, and why sort-related content on YouTube isn't what it used to be. Hello there, Martin here from Schildwache Potsdam. A bit of an unusual video for me, but you might have already noticed that I'm not only a HEMAist, so a historical fencer, but I'm also a scientist in the field of behavioral economics. And as such, I take a huge interest in the YouTube algorithm as it is, because it tries to predict and maximize behavior. Why maximizing behavior? Well, YouTube is a company after all, and they want to sell ads. So consumers have to spend as long of a time as possible watching as many ads as possible and then getting these ads tailored to them to YouTube to sell these ad spaces and make a maximum amount of profit. Okay, what prompted this video? Well, recently Shadiversity and Skallagrim, but also a lot of other YouTubers, especially in the sections of martial arts and more especially in the place of sword-related content, are struggling with the YouTube algorithm and facing decreasing viewerships. So what changed? Well, over the past year, YouTube changed from a subscription-based system to a recommendations-based system, like Skallagrim described it, or let's call it an observed behavior system. Because, well, YouTube was actually on a declining path, right? So viewerships in total on YouTube were declining, click rate wasn't what it used to be, and so something had to change. And actually, I think for YouTube as a company, they made, with the algorithm especially, the correct changes. Okay, so previously you got videos recommended based on your subscription, but now you get them recommended based on your behavior and that of everyone else around you consuming videos on YouTube. Because YouTube tries to predict your interests and tries to estimate your interest. They want to present you a set of videos, so not only one video, but a set of videos where you're most likely to click on one of these videos, one of these impressions, and then stay with the video as long as possible and possibly even consuming more videos after that and more videos after that to make you stay on YouTube as long as possible. It's really a rabbit hole, or maybe even a black hole, right? So how does this work? Well, let's make an example. If you're completely new to YouTube or you go into a private tab on your browser and open YouTube, then you get a couple of videos recommended. But YouTube doesn't have any information about you. So what does YouTube recommend to you? What does the algorithm recommend to you? Well, it estimates your interest from the interest of everyone else around you. So basically it presents to you the at the moment most popular videos. Okay? So if you then click on one of these videos, or if you search a video, because it's still a search machine as well, if you search for one video and then click on any video, then it will predict that your preferences, your interests in that specific field are quite a bit higher. Okay? And then here's why YouTube's also a searching machine. It links several videos to one and each other based on whom produced it and what's the title, what's the title card, what's the video description, and what are the video tags, right? So it tries to get every information out of the video and tries to then present you, preferably, videos that match now your estimated interest. But, very important, it doesn't only recommend you videos that you are interested, because it still wants you to present to you a like buffet of videos where the overall probability of you on clicking any of these videos is maximized, right? And that's where the fallacy of click-through rate comes in. Don't get me wrong, click-through rate is a useful statistic. It is a statistic of how many impressions were actually clicked and then watched. And an impression is every time that your video, so the thumbnail and the video title, gets presented to any viewer. So if it's presented 1,000 times and to 1,000 different viewers, and 50 of them click on your videos, then the click-through rate is 5%, right? But there's a fallacy. You're not really competing against your videos of the past, even the last weeks or the last few days, but you're competing against every video that is currently on the platform, right? And that is currently watched. So if you have a video that is currently not very popular, right? So it maybe is a year old and there are not many people clicking on that video, then it will probably not get recommended, because remember, your observed views and the observed views of everyone else around you, that's what's the most important, right? It presents you the most trending topics basically, and then it also tries to predict your interest based on especially your behavior. And that makes it really, really interesting, right? Because the YouTube algorithm doesn't feed you the same thing over and over again, which would be the case in the subscription-based system, right? You get only the videos of your subscriptions, but it also tries to nudge you to get into new kinds of videos, the most popular ones, to then extend your viewership, right? And why is that? Well, let's introduce a very simple economic concept here, and that is of decreasing marginal utility. That means the utility of every video that you additionally consume is decreasing, or decreasing marginal utility of every good that you consume. And that's basically just a satiation effect, right? So for example, if you have to eat pancakes for dinner, then the first pancake will probably taste really well, and maybe the second as well. But there will be a point where you're getting satiated, right? And so the marginal utility of consuming another pancake gets smaller and smaller, and it can get even negative, right? But just getting smaller is sufficient as an assumption here. Because now what happens? If a creator produces similar content over and over again, then their viewers get satiated with their content, right? So the interest in their content actually shrinks. And that's really, really interesting. And that's also one explanation why especially large salt-related content YouTubers are struggling, especially right now. Okay, because the most popular channels, they have already presented to close to their maximum audience. Okay, so a possible audience would be determined by everyone who watches YouTube in general, and then by their interest, right? If you can imagine the interest as a spectrum, and like salt-related content presents a certain range of that spectrum, then the most popular ones probably already almost reached all of them, right? So these content creators are especially faced with the marginal decreasing, or the decreasing marginal utility of their viewers, which is also one explanation why Shad's other channels doing well comparatively to his main channel, because there he changed up his content, right? And YouTube still can make the connections, right? That people still, a lot of people still watch Shadiversity content, and this content is linked to his other channels. So in the buffet of video recommendations, right, there will also be the other videos recommended in there. And then, because of decreasing marginal utility, these people who are watching Shadiversity content are also more likely to click on other sorts of content that he produces, for example. Now, that's a really interesting point. Okay, and what about small sort-related content producers like me, or maybe Federico Malaguti, which I would highly recommend you to check out his channel? Well, we're more or less suffering from like a cycle of interest, right? So on the one hand, we have an even narrower possible audience, because we're not talking about sword fighting in general, but we talk about practicing HEMA, and especially with certain sources. So this narrows down the possible audience even more, right? But also there's like a cycling through interest, and this is dependent on which series gets released, which topics are popular in general right now. And with COVID and the Ukraine war especially, there are actually other topics in people's mind than swords. And yes, I have to laugh, of course, because swords are a wonderful hobby, but they are a hobby after all. And this is also the case by just having a nice weather outside, right? So we have to remind ourselves that people have a limited cognitive capacity and they have limited time. And people's behavior depends on what alternatives they have. Not only if an alternative has a positive marginal utility, so if you consume it, it actually gives you some utility, but it also depends on what you are sacrificing on alternatives. Because if I watch one video, I cannot watch another. And if I watch videos, I cannot get out there and train, for example, and enjoy my hobby. So this is also the reason why you shouldn't listen too much to feedback, and that's still no evidence. If people get your video recommended by a newsletter of you, and then they watch the video and they say it's a great video, then of course it's useful feedback for you that you're still producing good content. But it doesn't have to be good or bad to make a deciding factor, but it has to be better than everything else, right? It has to be better than everything else to actually get chosen. And in our world today, where we get bombarded with lots of information, right? Lots of video recommendations, we are all competing, right? For the cognitive capacity, for the interest of the consumers, right? So it's a really dire perspective, but that's basically it. And that's also the reason why clickbait is so effective, right? Because it gets attention, it gets the views, and then if the video is actually good, then it gets watched, it gets recommended, and then it goes viral, okay? And if it has infected, because viral comes from virus, if it has infected enough people, then the curve will slow down, and again, you might get another chance with the next video, because obviously people liked your video. But if then that performs poorly, then the algorithm will say, well, maybe it's just a one-time off. How to perform well on YouTube? If I could say it that easily, this channel wouldn't be this small, okay? But I also decided for myself that I like to narrow my audience, that I like to produce content that is especially useful for my students, right? So YouTube isn't really an income for me, but it's a way of sharing my perspective with the community of historical martial arts. That's way another goal to keep in mind. But what if you have to earn your rent or your income over YouTube? Well, diversify. Go with current trends. It's kind of silly to say YouTube has an agenda for lightsabers or for boobs. These are just popular topics, and their popularity cycles, right, over time. So if Obi-Wan Kenobi gets released, then of course more people take interest in Star Wars and lightsaber battles, right? But of course, always your content has to have some quality. Anyway, I really understand that you're struggling, but ultimately this system is actually better for small YouTubers as well, because they have actually a chance to produce great content, and then that content gets recommended a lot, right? And then, yeah, it's based on a video per video basis, the behavior, right? And that makes it really hard. But, well, that's a business. And if you choose to stay in it, well, good luck. Until then, bye bye, take care, and ciao.